Hi, my name is Drew Bahugana, and this is my IR English presentation for semester 2. So, I'm going to start this off with the books I read this semester. So, the books I read this semester were Bloodmarked, written by Tracy Deonn, Allegiant, written by Veronica Roth, Lightning Thief, written by Rick Riordan, Heroes of Olympus, written by Rick Riordan again, and Twilight, written by Stephanie Meyer. So, going into a little bit of summary into these books, Bloodmarked was fantasy, and it was about a girl named Bree, who was is a sequel to a book about how she found out she was involved in a Welsh mythology, King Arthur's court sort of scenario, and how she was actually a descendant of King Arthur. And this just goes more into depth of what happens during the first book, which was at the end, Nick, one of I think her boyfriend at the time, was kidnapped, and she sets off to save him with Selwyn Kane and all of their friends like William and Alice and all of that. And so it was a pretty good book. I'll give it 5 stars because I think that it was pretty well written, and I like Tracy Deonn's style and her way of writing things, and I've grown to like it since I read the first book. And this was one book which I couldn't wait to get my hands on, which is why I was reading it during IR and I was reading it during class. I think that clearly a 5 out of 5 in my opinion. Second book, Allegiant. Allegiant is a dystopian fantasy. It was written by Veronica Roth. It's the third book in a series. So this book was building off of Insurgent and Divergent. I personally like the first 2 books. I did not like this one. It just plot didn't really resonate with me. I didn't really enjoy it too much. I I like the author style, but this just seemed a little too far of a deviation for me to enjoy. Overall, I'll give it like a 4 out of 5. It was still not a bad book. It was just, I take off that star because it wasn't my personal favorite. Next, we have The Lightning Thief, written by Rick Riordan. This is about a boy named Percy Jackson. It's a fantasy. It's involved with Greek mythology. I'm going to save this one for a little later because that's my favorite book, which I've chosen. Then we have Heroes of Olympus, which was written by Rick Riordan. Again, great book, fifth book at the end of a series called the Heroes of Olympus series. It was very good. I love the whole series. I love this book too. I liked it in particular because it wrapped up kind of the story elements that they left hanging in each book. Without going too into depth, it fulfills the great prophecy that was teased in the first and second books. It brings a wrap to the Greek Roman conflict that's been happening this whole time. And we also revisit Calypso, who we saw in book 4. All in all, 5 out of 5. Great book. I love Rick Riordan's style. I like the way he wrote it, and I like the way that it presented itself. Then finally, we have Twilight, written by Stephanie Meyer. This was another fantasy book. This one was more of a experiment for me than Allegiant or the other books because I really like fantasy, but this was delving into a more romantic fantasy. Honestly, I wasn't 100% convinced of it. I didn't really particularly like it. I think it was a good book. I can see why people do like it. I liked the idea of it. I just didn't really like the execution of it. I still think it's well written. It wasn't really as good of a book as I'd hoped it would be, and it didn't really excite me the same way as the other 4 did. So for that, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 as well, same as Allegiant. It was good. I think it could have been better. Um, Again, fantasy story about vampires. A brief summary of this book would be that Bella moves to Washington, very different from the Arizona environment in which she came from. She moves to Washington to live with her father. She meets a very strange boy and his family named Edward Cullen and the Cullen family. And so she basically just tries to figure out the mystery behind the man and figures out exactly what's wrong with him through a series of different situations that arise from their very first meeting to the end of the book. So back to The Lightning Thief. This was my number 1 favorite book. It was a fantasy, and I think the people who may be interested in it will be people who like the fantasy option. It's a very good fantasy book. It also ties in a decent amount of accurate history. It Excuse me. It involves Greek mythology. Very good Greek mythology series. I really liked it. And the craft choice was I selected in this case was diction because I think Rick Riordan's diction was just fantastic. I like the way he wrote it. He wrote it kind of like how a middle schooler would write it, which is kind of accurate to how Percy is because he's supposed to be 12 in this book, which is a detail that I think a lot of fans miss as they kind of overestimate his age. But he writes hilarious chapter titles such as Chapter 1, Help, I accidentally vaporized my math teacher, something like that. So Percy Jackson is a story about a boy who's very troubled. He's got ADHD. He's been kicked out of multiple schools. He lives with his mom. They're not very well off. They're kind of poor. They make ends meet, but it's a bit of a struggle at times. And his mom's an aspiring writer, and she married his stepdad, Gabe Ugliano, who is the opposite of her. She's very passionate, and he's very lazy. And one day, with his favorite teacher at Yancey Academy, Mr. Bruner, and his best friend Grover, the entire academy goes on a field trip to um, a New York museum. I think Metropolitan Museum, and Mrs. Dodds confronts him, and he gets attacked by her, and she's this vicious creature. And when he tries to talk about it, no one wants to talk about it, and so he tries to put it out of his mind. He also had another weird experience with these three old ladies on the side of the road who snipped a piece of yarn and disappeared. And so he makes his way up to Montauk to rent out a cabin with his mom because that's something they do when they have the ability to do that. And so they get to do that for that weekend. But on the way, they are ambushed by a Greek monster, the Minotaur. And so Grover is there. Grover turns out to be his protector, and they try to make their way to this hill and this camp that Grover keeps mentioning. And Percy eventually has to fight the Minotaur. And so this kind of goes into depth about the story of the gods and how Percy is a descendant of the gods and in an attempt to find his mother because his mother is missing, presumed dead by everyone, including the news. His stepfather is really milking it. And so he also has to go on a quest to recover the god Zeus's lightning bolt to him because it was stolen at the winter solstice. Nobody knows who took it. It's just missing. So I think it's a book that I think that people should really check out. It's the beginning of a great series. Fantastic. Finally, I don't know why this says introduction. I meant for it to say conclusion. We have IR Experience. IR Experience overall, I thought it was pretty fun. I mean, it was pretty good. I liked it. It gave a good break. Uh, in the future, I think that there are a lot of new books I could read if I had the opportunity to do so. In terms of IR time, I like the IR time. I think that for future 10th graders, I think they should appreciate the IR time because, it gives you a break from a little bit of the hectic classes that you might be taking, obviously AP exams and whatnot. And I think this is a good break from the AP exam experience, and I think that it's a good way for people to be able to just chillax once a week on a Monday. Choice of novels for English 11. I'm gonna stick to fantasy because personally I tried experimenting this year and it didn't really go that well. But maybe I will delve a little back into that romance genre. Sci-fi. I really like Little Brother and the way that the author wrote that. So I might experiment a little bit with sci-fi, but for the most part, I think that's what I'm gonna stick with. Thank you for listening to my IR reflection. I hope you have a nice day.